Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. As space becomes an integral part of Europe's security landscape, this year's two-day European Space Agency, or ESA Security Conference, focused on aligning institutional frameworks, boosting technological innovation and deepening partnerships between space and defence sectors. With landmark initiatives like Poland's CAMILA satellite constellation underway, we explore how Europe can strengthen resilience and sovereignty through strategic space investments and governance. To discuss key takeaways from the third ESA Security Conference, which ended today, we're joined by Hermann Ludwig Moeller, Director of the European Space Policy Institute. Welcome, Mr. Moeller. Thank you very much for taking the time. I know you've been,
much a pleasure.
Been very busy the last few days.
Absolutely.
So good to have you. Okay, so now, space security, it's something that most people would kind of, wonder what the connection was between space and security. Security, we think about NATO, we think about the military, and then we have space. What is the link?
Yeah, I think we should say that in the US, space and security have always been close to each other. What many people will not know is that the budget of the Department of Defense is about the budget of NASA, and in fact overtaking it right now. In Europe, we have been less aware of this. There have been less investments in space for security and defense, but with the invasion of Russia and Ukraine, we have seen the use of space. We've seen Earth observation satellites, so you see what is happening in the field, but also communications, and prominently Starlink. It has been a lot in the press with Elon Musk in communications. So what you see and what you hear, space is an essential element to give you a picture of the situation.
But we've had communication satellites for decades now, haven't we? What's so different about today?
Well, in fact, the first thing Russia did when invading Ukraine was to sabotage a communication satellite. It was a European satellite. It was a so-called geostationary satellite, like a TV satellite well above the Earth. What is new now is we have constellations like Starlink. They fly much lower, and they give you a different type of connectivity. They are comparable to normal connectivity that a broadband internet gives you at home. So it really is a competitive advantage to have these new solutions in communications.
Understood. Now, this conference, which finished today, what were your main takeaways from this?
Main takeaway, this was the third conference. So we had the first one 21, then 23, and this is 25. It was the first one, I would say, where everybody agreed this was no business as usual any longer, for two reasons. We already had the war in Ukraine, but we also had the Munich Security Conference when Europe realized that it may take its fate in its own hands. And I think that had a significant impact, and the word autonomy that has been around since a while for now, all of a sudden is really something that Europe, I believe, is ready to take in its hands, including Poland.
What does it mean for European countries? I mean, I mentioned the CAMILA satellite constellation, which Poland has developed, and I'll come to that in a second. But in terms of other countries within Europe, do we have the know-how, the technology, the experience to put together an integrated system like this?
Well, today we have prominent systems. We have the Galileo system, which is a navigation system. It's an operational European system by the European Union Space Program. And we have Copernicus for Earth observation. So there is a capability. There certainly is an industrial capability already in Europe. And the task is, and again, this includes, you mentioned CAMILA, this includes also capabilities in different nations, and to build a resilience across the industrial landscape of Europe and all its member states to bring capabilities to the table as Poland is doing now.
Are they interoperable, though, coming from so many countries?
That is an excellent question. Now, they may not always be interoperable at birth. There will be different elements that may emerge in different regions on European level, but also regionally or within a country. There's certainly an effort now, and that was in fact the topic of the conference, interoperability, something to bring these elements to best effect. This will be a task of the time to come. And as we see new systems being developed, we will also see some level of standardization so they actually can work together. They do not always have to work as a system to a system. Sometimes it's just the data on a data level. What you really want from the system is the data information on the ground. And from the data level, you can make them interoperable.
Understood. Now, I know we're talking about the European context, but of course, in terms of conflict and so on, we were working very closely with the United States. What about interoperability between the European and US systems?
Well, right now we are in a situation where there is some uncertainty how the cooperation with our long-term partners of decades will continue. I mentioned the security conference in Munich. It is maybe premature to really conclude how this will continue in the past. I was at the Space Symposium last week in Colorado Springs, the biggest gathering of space community on the planet, 11,700 people, a lot centered on security and defense. I can only say there was a clear message and willingness of that community to continue to be partner and work together. And this will also translate into sharing information, interoperation between systems.
Understood. Now, you talked about the use of space technology for communication purposes. Are there any other purposes? So, for example, we have visions perhaps of Star Wars and lasers being fired at enemy tanks or what have you. Is that very far-fetched?
Well, I should say in the parameter of the conference, it was clearly said that we are talking about something that is defending us. So that defending us would include to be aware of what is happening, and I mentioned communication and Earth observation, also navigation. It may include, although this is not mature at this stage, but there is a talk about missile defense systems. Yeah? So to defend yourself against things that may fly in higher orbits. That is a big topic in the United States right now under the heading of Golden Dome. And I think it's such a big question that it is also a big question for the USA. And we shall see what it will translate into in Europe. I think this is not the step we are at today.
But Israel has the Iron Dome. Is that something similar?
Well, Israel, in terms of surface to protect, is much more
smaller.
It's smaller. We're talking about probably a more global protect shield, because if you wanted to have an effective protection, you need to really see as things happen, as they originate, to be able to intervene early enough.
Yeah, but the technology that's being used in Israel, for example, could that be extended to Europe?
I wouldn't dare to say whether this is a direct extension. There is certainly a complexity of the system, also the coverage and making it reliable, that you can trust the system to actually protect you in all situations. This is a major undertaking. And this is not a technology off the shelf you can just plug and play. It will be a significant investment on whoever will go that route.
I'm sure it isn't just plug and play. That would be way too easy, wouldn't it? But how far along the journey would you say Europe is on getting to what you have just described?
Excellent question. If we compare the scale of investment, which is one parameter when you want to really assess where you stand, today Europe is about 5 times underinvested compared to the USA. And if you talk specifically security and defense, it's even 15 times. So we're very small in terms of investment. I believe this is going to change. I think Europe certainly will need to double their investments. I think that is a fair number. We are promoting a GDP value of up to 0.25% to make this happen. This would include civilian space and security and defense. And it's a duality between the two, in fact.
Sure, dual use, yeah.
And one thing that was clear also at the conference, we're not talking about 2040. We're talking about the next 3 to 5 years. And we're talking about 2025 as a decisive year to make a significant first step. And this was the ESA Security Conference. And it's the ESA ministerial meeting this year in November in Germany that will be the proof of measuring the ambition translating into action.
Okay, so let's see how far that goes when we meet when you meet in Germany. Now, can you explain the relationship between the Security Conference and the European Union in terms of how do they work together? Is it purely just financial, or is it technological, or is it some kind of integration in other ways?
Yeah. In fact, we coined a motto almost at the conference that it takes a village. So you need all the participants on the table. That may be nations, that is the investments that your country is doing right now. It may be in the framework of ESA, which is intergovernmental. So a number of nations, they may come together to implement a certain solution. And it includes what the European Union does in the space program. It will be all three components. When it comes to the European Union space program, because you refer to it explicitly, a big point today is protect the infrastructure we already have in orbit and the infrastructures that we will deploy. Because one learning we have also from Ukraine is with the first things to be attacked is the space infrastructure, because it gives you a competitive advantage, and an enemy may want to blind you before he takes further action.
Right. So you mentioned one of the learnings from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. How would you assess Russia's progress in this field?
Well, Russia has been a space power. Russia still is strong when it comes to launch and human spaceflight. It's a matter of time that Russia will again have capabilities also in other domains. It is, again, not something equally also not in Russia, a plug and play you take out of a cupboard. There is significant innovation required, but there is an emphasis on investment in this strategically, and the security and military posture of Russia is certainly high on the agenda, and you can derive from that that the investments will be there.
Right. And do you see, for example, Russia, China, North Korea, who seem to be in the same camp at the moment, actually collaborating on something like this? Because, with the resources and technology that China can probably access, it could probably shorten that life cycle, learning curve.
I wouldn't dare to anticipate what it means for the space domain. Certainly we are today in a completely different geopolitical setup, and that is not specific to space. I don't think this will be primarily driven by space. It will be driven by bigger considerations of these countries and regions. I think an answer for Europe to this clearly is that we shall equally, even more than we already do, partner with Japan, with South Korea, with emerging space powers. There is India on the horizon. So we also need to find what sometimes people refer to as a coalition of the willing in Europe, but beyond Europe, to really offer an alternative between what may be sometimes conceived as very west or very east.
Right. Well, fascinating area, Mr. Moeller. Thank you so much for explaining that to our audience. And again, thank you for taking the time. I know you've been very, very busy recently.
Excellent.
Have a good
Pleasure.
evening.
Thank you very much.
You. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Goodbye.